If you look at human history, it's easy to tell a pretty horrific story. But between the wars, and perhaps even most eloquently in the midst of the wars, we have written music and we have written poetry. We have our knee on the neck of a planet that likes to breathe, and it is screaming, I cannot breathe, and the CO2 climbs. I cannot breathe, and we point at each other. They're doing it, they're doing it.
When you see where we are today, you see a shift taking place around this time period. What's coming cannot barely be imagined. It is of a different dimension to what we know now.
We need to stop grieving what has been let go of, and we need to start being really curious about what's coming.
So you need to find that wild, abandoned nature inside yourself, that creative being. In the times ahead, that's all we have.
Life is the brightest thing in the universe. Who are you? You're the brightest thing in the galaxy. You're the brightest thing in the universe, maybe. You're here to light up the cosmos.
Welcome to the Deja Blu Podcast, where we believe that living a life of magic can be the default. Join us each week as we playfully and authentically dive into the mysteries of life and explore what it truly means to be human. From spirituality, wellness, and all things taboo, we don't hold anything back. So without further ado, let's let the magic unfold. Hello, beautiful humans. Ah, come on, you're all so beautiful. Oh my God. Oh, my heart is just doing massive backflips in my chest just at the feeling of all of my favorite humans in one space, in what feels like a little slice of the Garden of Eden, a little bit of heaven on earth. So welcome to what feels like a dream of mine being made manifest, and just the opportunity to weave incredible minds together. And each and every one of you, I believe, are creating a seed of what it means to actually heal. Well, first and foremost, feel all of it, and then heal or face it, and then start to transmute it, and therefore utilize that and that alchemy of that process into your service. And so I believe that I've brought, from my perspective, the individuals that are going to receive some inspiration and actually do something with it. Because there's the difference of just like sharing inspiration and then going back out into the world and just doing everything exactly the same as we did before. And then there's also like starters, those that are going to receive the inspiration, the activation, and are actually going to start to look at our own lives and see how we can shift one more degree at least back into integrity. And if you actually follow 1 degree out, 1 degree at the beginning kind of just looks a little bit like this. But when you follow 1 degree out for 10, 20 years, it starts to look like this. And so this is what it means to make a difference and make a change, even in the micro moments and the little in-between moments. And so this is my intention for the conversation today, is to weave some really brilliant minds together to activate inspiration, illumination, and an opportunity for each of us to take away something that feels like we can then contribute it to everything that we do from this point forward. So thank you for making my dreams come true and being a part of that. And I would never, ever, ever want to do this with anybody else. So I'm truly feeling so honored. And before we go into it, I had a little bit of a synchronistic moment with one of my new favorite humans, Debra Silverman, who we're going to have up in 1 second. And she is, I like to call her the Oracle of the Stars. She's one of the fabulous astrologers that have come into my life alongside Lily Ashwell, who was also bringing that Oracle of the Stars in full force. And I told her the date of this event, and she did her little thing and like looked at what's going on in the astrology. And she turned to me and she's like, "Oh, did you do this on purpose?" And I was like, "No." She was like, "You'll never guess what day it is." And I was like, "Tell me." And so I'm going to have her tell you firsthand what day it is, because she's going to do it much better than I will. To just give a little bit of an understanding of like the macro experience of the magic that is weaving this moment, not through the mind, but through the heart. And that is like, there's my will and then there's thy will. And this whole experience has been guided what feels like from thy will. And so this is just a little bit of a snippet from Debra Silverman about the astrology of today and the importance of us all coming together. Welcome to the stage, Debra Silverman. We love you.
Aloha, welcome. I think it's so auspicious that Blue had no idea. And this has been one of her gifts to all of us, the synchronicity and the magnetic force field that brought this audience of people. As you look around, the shiny ones, the fortunate ones. There's a whole bunch of people in this gathering who are fire signs. Raise your hand if you're Aries, Leo, or Sag, or that, right? Look at that. So when I went around and asked, there's a lot of enthusiasm and passion and drive and chi, and this is what our friend Blue brings us, is the invitation to show up as big as you'd like. So some of you may know there was an eclipse that just happened 2 days ago. In 1919, in May, there was an eclipse 2 days after Einstein found relativity. So eclipses are markers to show us where the world could possibly change and open up a door. So I want to just put that in the space that we are at this brink where there's an opportunity, one, because of that eclipse that just occurred, and two, because of today. So let's first do the eclipse. The sun was in Taurus. The sun is in Taurus. The moon is in Scorpio. It's always a full moon when there's an eclipse, a lunar eclipse. And the moon in Scorpio addresses topics that aren't easy. Topics that have to deal with not the happy face that we're all presenting today, because the moon's in Sag today, but in the last week it was about addressing anxiety and depression and fear, and the fear of never getting married, never having kids. I think so many of you that are in that circle are living with the millennial dilemma of the new world is coming, but it's not here. And the old world is leaving, but it hasn't left. And we're in this in-between state. And that eclipse triggered and should have triggered a scorpionic entrance into what do we do with our emotional content? Because while we're all doers in this place, I can see how much of you are manifesting monsters and have so much chi. The underbelly that lives in the human condition right now is suffering. And why are we suffering? Because we're scared. And why are we scared? Because we can't see what's about to happen. Unless we take off our sunglasses. Why am I wearing sunglasses? This happened during your podcast. So the question is, how comfortable are we? How comfortable are we to be face to face with the human condition brought to us by that eclipse, triggering the deepest wound in our psyche, which is the planet is in a critical moment. We are dealing with the climate crisis, whatever we're going to call it, whether it's the coral, whether it's the melting of the ice, whether it is the plastic in the ocean. There's a million stories that we could address. And at the end of our day, my good friend Carla Johnson, who's a geologist, is going to address the planet is going through a major change. But it hits you in your emotional body, and the invitation brought to us by Blue, who has 4 planets in Scorpio, is how comfortable are we with our shadow, with our unconscious, with our human, with the emotional body, with our longings and our fears. So there's that. Now today, the whole energy shifted from that Scorpio dark, scary thing to Sag. The moon's in Sag today. So, and the sun's in the 9th house, and we're having this wonderful day of enthusiasm and joy and optimism. We're going to have 2 brainiacs sit in front of us, one of which is going to talk about death in Scorpio, and he's a scientist and a doctor who's dealt with the whole word cancer. The other is a synthesizer who brought with this incredible activation through the gene keys, and then it comes back to you on this day where, get ready. So the sun moves 1 degree a day around the sky. Every day we know when your birthday is what sign you are, because we can predict every single day the sun moves 1 degree. But today, the sun just hit, it's going to sound funny, Uranus. So the sun
That's about how you get that energy, though. Do you know what I mean?
That bottom
you
chakra.
That sun on your
that
butthole.
bottom chakra. So
Sorry.
she had to do it. She just had to do it. So let me tell you about Uranus, because this is if I know we got to change the word.
I have to.
Uranus was found. Get ready. Uranus was found in the 1780s, right at the time when the French were cutting off heads and changing the whole structure of their reality in the French Revolution. Right at the same time that the Americans, we landed on this land, we cut off heads, we started a whole new system based on an equal democratic world where our forefathers came in and said, let's revolutionize. It's a revolution. Uranus rules revolution. It was found in the 1780s, and it breaks the structure. Today, there goes the sun every day, 1 degree. It hit Uranus on the day that she picked, right after an eclipse, without knowing it. Let's hear it for Blue, whose intuition is operative. And now the question is, how are you doing with, 1, the full moon and the honesty of the human condition, your human emotional body? Because with all of our podcast and learning and studying and going on memes and reading through social media, it's your emotional body in the end of the story, when no one's looking, that determines your evolution and your ability to eat the poison, Scorpio, and not get scared of the storyline. So we have to be face to face. If you watch, there's a wonderful documentary called Choosing Earth, and there are 2 luminaries in it. One is Joanna Macy, and one wrote The Soul of Money called, see, I knew this was going to happen, Lynn Twist, we all know her. And she sat in the camera and looked straight in and said, ready? We are going into hospice. The earth as we know it, the physical world, is not going to survive the transition. Now, it's not a surprise. It's according to the natural rhythms. However, what we're going to hear today from these two beautiful men and our friend Blue is, how do we change the mindset to accept that death or a change or transformation or mutation, call it what you will, is acceptable? How do you do that personally inside your body? Oh, I know. You take care of your body, you eat healthy food, and most of all, you deal with the human condition. Because as long as we have the old system operative, which is to get quiet, to get shut down, to live in fear, and to pretend, which I know none of you are doing, then what we know is that old system has got to go. So the invitation today is, can you trust, while we're walking into this major transition for the whole planet, that this has been meant to be, and nothing is not being witnessed by the intuitives, the ones that can hear, the ones that are watching, the ETs, call it what you will. The good news is we need you to be available during this hospice, to be the midwives, to be wise enough inside your own psyche, to hold your heart and your vulnerability, and that human full moon we just had, in addition to today with the moon in Sag, where we get to party and have fun and listen to music and have an incredibly intellectual conversation. There's two parts to the story, the human dimension and the new world trying to be birthed. Mm-hmm. And the invitation is, can you guys be the midwives, everyone in this room, to make that transition? Mm-hmm. And that was my 5 minutes that she gave to a Gemini. How did I do?
You did so good. You did so good for an air sign. Look at you go. We love you, Debra Silverman. Thank you. Alrighty, I only really know how to do two things, which is to play and pray. Everything else I'm making it up as I go along. So let's do one of those. Let's just drop into a prayer and just tune in for a moment before we start. All right, so I invite you to close your eyes and just allow yourself to go back into that internal landscape, that realm of infinite possibilities. Just have a moment right now where there's no overstimulation, an infinite amount of humans that we can have a conversation with, an infinite amount of food that we could eat, or the gene key readings, or just them in between moments, and just allow ourselves to just ground in, just arrive. Hear the sounds around you. Feel the earth underneath you. Feel the nature. And being alongside your brothers and your sisters. And collectively, let's allow a really, really deep breath in through your nose, right into the deepest part of your belly, and hold it on the inhale. Anything that is not serving you, anything that you have picked up that is not vibrationally yours, anything that is holding you back from fully just being in this moment, we're going to exhale it out through your mouth in 3, 2, 1, sighing it out. We're going to do 2 more of those. Deep breath in, hold on the inhale. Make sure your spine is straight, your shoulders are relaxed, and your heart is forward, and hold it. Just sit in the silence just for a moment. And exhaling through the mouth. Deepest breath you've allowed all week. Inhaling through the nose, hold on the inhale, expanding that diaphragm. When you think you can't add any more oxygen, just sip in a little bit more through your mouth and hold it. With all the gratitude you feel in your heart for all of the blessings you have in your life and for this moment right now. We're going to exhale that gratitude into the space and marinate in it for the rest of our time together. In 3, 2, 1, sighing it out. As we open up this sacred space to a place of unconditional love and unconditional non-judgment. As we feel our roots going into the center and the core of this earth. Allowing ourselves to have the courage to transcend some sort of identity of who we think we are. We are not our name. We're not even our body. You are the infinite soul that lives within us. The eternal, timeless, forever expansive soul that resides within our being, and recognizing that our beauty is born from how much we love. Nothing from the external, but of how much we truly love ourselves and each and every person we come into contact with. Recognizing every single person here is God wrapped in physical form and an opportunity to meet yourself over and over and over again. So we say a prayer today as we open up this space to allow everything to flow through the heart without touching the mind, to allow ourselves to be in the medicine of the moment and that which is needed over and over and over again. And recognizing each and every one of you hold a very unique puzzle piece. No puzzle piece better than the other. But without one of those puzzle pieces, the artwork would not be complete. So giving yourself that permission and that power to be the fullness of who you are in every given moment. And to hold that unconditional loving pillar for yourself. Whatever it is arises, whether it's a confronting emotion, some constriction, or if it's joy and connectivity and oneness and love. All of you is welcome here. All of you is sacred. And we transcend this binary experience of there being some sort of right and wrong. And now allow ourselves to receive whatever is most alive. And of all 8 billion people on this planet, it is you, this constellation of humans that have gathered here today for a very specific reason. So thank you for doing the necessary work to be a vibrational match to this conversation. Thank you for your courage to face off with yourself over and over and over again, to chip away at all that is not in resonance so your authenticity can shine. Because it is your vibratory state that is your contribution to the collective. And so may we take full ownership of that piece and allow ourselves to fully arrive in the only moment that we have for the rest of our lives, which is right now, for forever. Thank you to the spirits of this land, for our ancestors that have prayed on this land in a good way, to the elements and the directions, to the star nations, and to all sentient life on this earth. We have this conversation for the greatest good of all, across all timelines, across all dimensions, and across all of space. And so it is. Oh. And when you're ready, and only when you're ready, opening your eyes and coming back into the space as we have officially landed. Alrighty, I think we're ready for you. Zach Bush and Richard Rudd, eh? Yeah, you're going to be over there. We're going to have Zach in the middle. So you're going to be over there. Zach's going to be in the middle.
Holy smokes. That's a lot to take in right there.
Whew. First and foremost, I would love to have Richard share your blessing to bestow upon all of us before we go into it.
This was kind of written partly in your honor.
Oh.
P.S. Richard is the only person I know that sits with almost like a quill-like pen with a leather-bound book and writes everything by hand. But of course, a wizard and a mystic would only do something like this. And so this is what's happening right now.
So if you ask for the copy of it, it's here. Yeah. Blessing of the mystic biome. And you can close your eyes for this. And maybe a nice thing to do is hold your own biome, your belly. With our first breath, we bless this space. And we bless the warm-blooded animal of the body electric, filling this space with a matchless majesty of presence. We bless the cool, clean earth beneath our feet and the soft footfalls of our ancestors, their strengths and trials, and the long, dusty lineage of their laughter and tears. We bless mother and father, boy and girl. We bless the honey of voice, the hearth of food, and we honor the songs of our elders, their roots rising to the stars, rich with the awe and the wisdom of the land. With our second breath, we bless the elements, the wuthering of the wind in the lonely valley, the lovely lichens and the soft musky mosses, and the sacred earth fire burning magenta in these hollow hills of ebony and gold. We bless the waters and their beings without and within, and the silent glint of sunlight on the shoals. We bless the distant cloud-capped mountain and the sentinel of stone, the rune script of landscape written in river and rain. With our third breath, we bless the blossoming of Gaia, the sun-seasoned earth ripened with barley days, the emerald nights of moon-winged moths, and the listless sighing of the seas and the skies, echoing the melancholy of loss. We bless the hearts of birds and their liquid song, and the crest of creation, our eternal dawn. We bless the miracle of animal and all who swim and sing and scurry and scuffle and bite. One day all will be yours again. We bless the provenance of earth, the dreams of trees, the endless weave of herb, flower, fruit and fungi, freely given, soul food of Gaia. With these three breaths, we bless these three, ancestor, animal, and earth, the mystic biome. May our hearts beat together in sacred rhythm. May we each be nourishment for the other. May our lives be an eternal offering of love as we lie entwined and enshrined in perfect devotion to the green law, where the fruits of Gaia are woven into the field of praise. May all beings in this body be blessed. May all beings in this space be blessed. May all beings in this mystic biome be blessed.
Thank you, Richard. He wrote that specifically for today, for each and every one of you. Very, very special, very unique. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction to these two magical geniuses. Richard came into my life in a very, very synchronistic way. That feels like, of course, this would be the first domino that pushes our relationship and our connection. I have been studying the gene keys for about 5 years up until this point, and it had single-handedly changed the entire course of my life. And I remember on the podcast when I had a very small audience at this point, and I was sitting in the corner of my bedroom, and I made a request from everybody that listened to the podcast that they would hold the vision that Richard and I would be friends and that he would come on the podcast. So I asked the listeners to close their eyes as long as they were not driving a car and to visualize Richard coming on the Deja Blu podcast. And within 2 weeks, 2 people had reached out to me. One of them that said that they had won a lucky draw competition to have a session with Richard. And she was listening to the podcast, and when she heard the podcast, she won this competition. She ended up having this, she had this conversation with Richard and had mentioned it to Richard about me, and that planted the first seed. And then another person reached out to me out of the blue and said, I'm doing an interview with Richard and I know that you're a student of the Gene Keys and I would love for you to do the interview with me. So all of a sudden, from two different angles, I had given the opportunity to connect with Richard. And so I jumped on the Zoom call 15 minutes early. I was like, I'm so excited. Oh my God. And he came on 15 minutes early too. And we ended up having a beautiful conversation and connection that ended up leading him to come on the podcast. That ended up leading us to a beautiful friendship and connection that has led us to here today. So the first domino was pushed with pure magic and manifestation. So and since then, this Richard has just been an incredible testament of what humility and deep presence and grounded wisdom feels like. And it has been nothing short of an absolute blessing having you in my life. And the fact that I get to share you with my friends and to be able to continue to weave alongside you. He's also the founder and the creator of the Gene Keys. Are you familiar with the Gene Keys? Yeah, you get some like good Gene Key readings over there. It's a living transmission that feels like a technology leading us into a higher state of consciousness by understanding our greatest shadows and recognizing within our shadow is the seed of our greatest potential and our service to the world. So thank you so much for being here, Richard. Truly an honor to have you. Thank you.
I love you, Blue.
I love you. And we have Zach Bush in the house as well. And I have been able to have the blessing of weaving with this majestic man recently. And I swear, every time he enters the space, he also comes with a tidal wave of good vibes. And it's just like, whoop, boom. And the hug is so real and so genuine. And when I'm like, how you doing? It's like, I'm great. I'm always great. This is just great. We're having a great time. I'm like, yeah, we are. And I'm like, all of a sudden I'm in it. And I don't know why we're excited, but like there's the pure bliss of just being alive. And so it's so on brand with everything that this man weaves into the world. And his ability to articulate deep scientific studies and understanding of the body, but also at the same time being so connected to spirituality and something greater than ourselves. And witnessing you speak is like witnessing somebody plugged in to life source energy just flowing through you, and just witnessing it is a miracle in itself. And I've actually written down this word because on the way over here, I kept saying it at least 15 times over. I was like, don't mess up, don't mess up. And so I'm just going to say it out loud. Like, I didn't know how to say this word. But he is a doctor of endocrinology.
Nice. Endocrinology.
I did it wrong. I knew it. It's all right. It's all part of it. I wrote it down and I said it like 10 times in the car.
It's as worthless as it sounds.
Also internal medicine and the microbiome of the gut to the soil health on our planet, and how it's all interrelated and interconnected, and the amount of work that he is putting in behind the scenes to support with the evolution of Gaia, and how we can better work with Gaia and our own individual bodies, and recognizing that the earth is our body, the water is our blood, the air is our breath, and the fire is our spirit, and that there is no separation, but yet we have been caught up in the illusion that there is. And so Zach has devoted his life to rebridging that separation that we have created and bringing us back into synergy with the whole. So it is truly an honor to be in the presence of both of you men. And thank you so much, Zach, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Blue. Thank you all for being here. It's magical to be in a connected community, and this is one of your gifts, Blue. I feel like you are always introducing other people, but all of you could introduce Blue in the way that she came into your life and the effect that she's had on you. And for those of you who haven't met this woman, you're in for a treat. This is a person that, for me, really embodies the dedication to sacrifice of things believed before in order to realize the new things. And she has dismantled and dismantled and dismantled. And it's one of the things that all of us have been in process of. And my last 15 years have definitely been an intense journey of dismantling. But to witness that in another person and to watch it create such beauty in the world around her is just a real testament to each of our potential. This woman is living an example of what play and prayer can manifest in life. And we all need to take deep lessons from that, because there's a new era about to open up that we can all feel under the skin and in the air that we breathe. And the reality is probably already here. We just can't quite see it yet, but we can feel it. And I feel like this woman is one of those fish that got into the new pool before the rest of us, and she is swimming in waters yet uncharted, and she is playing with glee in those waters. But it's also notable that for when you see somebody jump into the next pool ahead of the game, it's really freaking lonely at moments. No matter how many people you're surrounded by, it's lonely because the vibrations you're experiencing simply haven't been felt before. And it codes for new genes, codes for new epigenetic patterns within those genes. And so, Blue, I just acknowledge the pain, the heartache, the sorrow, and the fucking joy that comes through you as well. And I just honor that because it's hard fought. And
Well said.
Thank you. Wow. Truly, truly deeply received. So welcome back to another episode of the Deja Blu Podcast. Here we are, live audience, so exciting. And we have had such a weekend, a profound weekend. We had Andre host for the Know Thyself podcast, Dr. Joe Dispenza, and have a really important conversation around the power that lies within all of us, and then being able to sort of pass the baton on, and then to continue to lead the conversation with the two of you. And so I just want to open it up with just the feeling of we're all experiencing it. We are all going through massive internal shifts. We are all facing off with the parts of ourselves that I like to call crunchy. And we are recognizing when I look left, right, and center, it's all happening within ourselves and within our beings, and recognizing the interconnected nature of also our experience with life as a whole, and systems of control are collapsing all around us. And the world is changing into a new epoch. And so the reason why I felt the call to bring the two of you together for many reasons is the relationship with the soil, the microbiome of our gut, our own personal here and now, what it is that we can do from a very educated standpoint, from coming from Western medicine, and then being able to use that information and that understanding and recognizing and asking the deeper questions that are quite sparse in Western medicine, and to actually connect spirituality with it, while also at the same time the prophecies of what has been and what will come, recognizing off of the gene keys, the stars, and ancient prophecies that have bestowed this understanding. So I would love to open up the first question into, what do you feel is the piece around our own individual gut and our relationship with the earth, and how we can start to take responsibility of what's happening within and how it interconnects with our planet Earth? Zach?
I think I can start maybe with the concept of the five senses there, and the blessing and the challenge that these five senses have created in the human journey. We have these five dominant senses that innervate a huge portion of our brain. The majority of our cortex is dedicated to sensory processing, this huge second brain in the back of our head. The cerebellum is our whole musculoskeletal coordination, sensing where we are in space and time. And so we have dedicated massive neurology to just feeling, the sensory experience, the musculoskeletal experience of being embodied. And then we have this huge, motor cortex moving that within that space, and getting constant information as to what each motion is interacting with its environment. And we have the visual cortex and the auditory cortex, and you go through the whole list of the five senses, and it's an amazing amount of your brain is dialed into these things. And so I think very appropriately, even long before we had the neuroanatomy figured out, as far back as probably the Babylonians, and the Greeks always get credit for it a couple thousand years after the Babylonians, but in Greece, Epicurus, looking at the phenomenon of how much of the brain seemed to be dedicated to the five senses, created the whole field that we now have adopted as Epicurus, and the study of food and pleasure on the human brain. But Epicurus really believed that the purpose of being human was to experience pleasure. It's the only way he could figure out as to why we designed a brain or we were designed with a brain that would be constituted with such dedication to these five senses that would give us the experience of pleasure. And then we've created from that space. And if you look at human history, it's easy to tell a pretty horrific story because it's basically just one long, 200,000-year war on everything, and most of all against ourselves. But between the wars, and perhaps even most eloquently in the midst of the wars, we have written music and we have written poetry that is an expression of our grandiosity at the soul level, at this level. And I'm always intrigued by the most horrific moments in human history because of the beauty that's in them. And in recent human history, nothing really compares to the first couple weeks of World War I. This is 1914. France, as a single country, lost 28,000 men in a single day. 25 years of the Vietnam conflict, we lost 60,000 over 25 years, 28,000 in a day. We were losing 60,000 in a week routinely on those Northern European fronts at the beginning of World War I. Men were literally climbing over piles of bodies of their brothers and countrymen to get up into the machine gun fire to be mowed down. And so what is it in the human that is living in such an ecstatic state that it's charging up that pile of bodies to be mowed down? And the songs that came out of that, the poetry that came out of the near ecstasy of the human tragedy that was unfolding there, capture something about this neurologic system of the five senses. And so what is it about the gut? Like why is this new era that started around 2010, 2012 was the tipping point of modern science, of suddenly being like, oh my God, is it possible that the gut is everything? That just happened. Like, this is new science that's unfolding. Why 2010, 2012? The decade of the 2000 to 2010 in science was called the decade of the brain. We discovered more about the human brain in that decade than all human history before that. And then this decade, 2010 to 2020, became the decade of the gut. And so it was a little bit of a story of the end of the five senses and the beginning of the next expression of humanity, because our limitations and the beauty that comes through the five senses are the yin-yang of the experience. Our five senses are uniquely designed to give us the belief that we are separate. That is a line in the Course in Miracles from the 1960s. And when I read it, I was really appalled. The human senses were designed to give you the impression you're separate. And that sounds like a trap. Like what God or the divine or the universe designed us to be this screwed up, to think we were separate from nature? The five senses were designed to fool us? And the answer, I believe, it doesn't come right there in the Course in Miracles, but as I've sat with that for a couple years and just been witness to the five senses since then, it's the realization that we are the only species that in the African sunset that has become my signal of I am home. When I'm watching that sunset and there's 20 humans that may or may not know each other, but we all catch that moment of the sun suddenly doing that existential beauty, and we all stop and hardly want to breathe because it's so jaw-droppingly beautiful, colors you've never imagined happening. And then you look around and the birds haven't changed their course. They're all flying around. The monkeys in the trees all have their back to the sunset. We are the only species looking at the sunset. Of the millions of species, we're the only one watching the sunset. What's the deal with that? Epicurus was right, I think, is we were designed to believe that we were separate, i.e. to be able to have the experience of separateness such that we would see the sunset. The bird never stops to look at the sunset because it is the sunset. It is sensing the electromagnetic frequencies of the universe all the time, and it doesn't have a brain that tells it, oh, there's the sun, and therefore it's colorful, and therefore it's beautiful. It's simply flying in the beauty. Just like the fish does not see the ocean or know the concept of water because it is the water. It is in the flow state with that state of being. And so we have been given five senses to separate us from nature so that we would see the beauty, so that we would have a unique place in the creation of life to be able to vibrate in the frequency of love, because it's seeing beauty that triggers this vibration, and we are uniquely equipped with that. But of course, the shadow of the five senses in believing you're separate is the belief you're separate, therefore rejected. And so we developed a myth of rejection from nature. And so what is happening right now is a wonderful rebirthing of humanity, where we start to get past the 5 senses and remember we have 7 other senses that all are in the domain of the gut. Mm-hmm. And then we are sensing reality now as a species in this last 13 years from the gut. And it's fascinating to see what's gone fad-like through the universe. You know, what started with like biohacking and all this stuff transitioned in the last, I'd say 2017 was a turning point where suddenly it was breath work. Everybody was doing breath work. 32 different versions of it, whatever it is. But everybody was knowing that it was breath work. And breath work has a beautiful way of shutting down the cortex and the brain and bringing you down below. And it's very cool that the diaphragm seems to be this barrier, right? It's the wall between the old us and the new us. And so for me, why the gut is important is because it's really defining a new era from which we start to live from a different sensing system that is fully integrated and never was fooled that we were separate from all things, has always known that we are all things. And as we go on and through this journey, we can hear from Richard as to kind of his journey with the gut here, I hope. And we'll loop back, I think, into starting to ask, what is human thought really? What is human consciousness, and where does that come from? And we'll find out it's not the 5 senses. But I think this is the era we're in, is the reawakening of the gut. And your gut instinct is brought you here today. So welcome.
And this is a beautiful segue into a story that Richard just shared with us last night around your relationship with the gut and the stomach, and how it has actually opened up space for the epiphany of the gene keys to actually come to you. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. It's lovely to be here. My part in this story is in my 20s, I was a body worker. And so I began my journey working on bodies and with my hands. And I studied with 2 Taoist teachers. One of them you probably know, Mantak Chia. Some of you may have heard of him. And I was one of his early students, and studied many years with him these Taoist principles, and learned a huge amount. And my specialized field, which I learned from him, was called Qine Sang, which is working in the gut, working in the belly, and all the systems that move through the belly. You know, so the lymphatic system, where you could work the nodes, the lymph nodes in that area. There's more lymph nodes there than anywhere else. And then the peristalsis, and working on the skeletal, the muscular system as well. Once the belly becomes soft, you can get your hands right into the deeper muscles of the back, the psoas, and you can really work the skeleton and the muscles at a core level. And then the acupuncture meridian system, you'd also work from there, and the circulatory system as well. So you can there's a whole sort of technique of flushing the pulses and the aortic pulse in that area. And anyway, I became very specialized in this work, and I did a lot. And my training really was that we were encouraged to go through was you work on your own belly every day for 9 months for 2 hours. So you'd lie in the mornings, you'd wake up, you put your knees up, and you'd just let your hands start to explore your belly. And you start with your fingers, and you're working, you're moving, and you're untangling knots. And so over that year or so, I became incredibly intimate with that area of my being. And it started to soften and open in layer upon layer upon layer. And one of the things I found out is that trauma lives in there. That most of our traumas and most of our memories of trauma are kind of encoded in the gut and in the lining of the intestines and the colon and all of it. It's just all held there very deeply. And so working in that area allowed me to kind of clear a lot of those things. And it wasn't a pleasant, experience a lot of the time. And then I worked on others for many years doing that work, and it was phenomenal. But what it did is it opened up that intelligence in me from this area of the being. I should say, by the way, the other teacher I studied with was a man called Hua Qing Ni, Master Ni, he was known as, and he was an expert in the I Ching. And his book on the I Ching remains one of the most incredible books on the I Ching today. And anyway, working deep in that area opened me up and opened up my breathing and opened up my awareness in a way that I didn't really understand for a while. And, life went on. And one morning in 1996, I woke up into this spontaneous higher state of consciousness. So I woke up from sleep. I actually woke up. I was lying in bed and I woke up in the morning, and I woke up into this state of higher consciousness, and it opened up from my belly. And for 3 days and for 3 nights, I remained in that state with the doors fully open. And you can never forget it because light was streaming from my belly in all, and connecting me to creation in just every conceivable way. And I entered into this field of omniscience, I guess, which sounds kind of wild. What do you mean by omniscience? It means that anything I wanted to know, I could know. And I can't really explain that. I could go anywhere in the universe, past, present, future. I could find things out. I just knew them. So I spent 3 days and 3 nights exploring the universe. And I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just drank lots and lots of water. And I traveled around the English countryside in these 3 days as well. I followed this kind of pathway. That's another story. But anyway, out of that kind of extraordinary experience, I ended up sitting on an island in North Wales, Bardsey Island, and which a fisherman had taken me out to there and just dropped me on this little island, uninhabited island. And I knew that's where I had to go. And so I was sitting on this little hill on this little island, no one else on it. And the state of consciousness kind of dissipated and it went back down into the earth. And then I was me again. I was Richard again. I was like, oh, shit. Not this guy. And it was like the biggest disappointment of my life. And I then spent 7 years literally trying to kind of get back to that state, deny that state, thinking I was the Messiah, every possible, combination of trying to deal with it, until eventually, after many years, it started to settle in me because I didn't know what to do. I had all this vision of the way the universe worked, but I had no framework at all. And that's where later the I Ching came in for me, and I started to realize that there was this code that was universal, that was encoded in this Chinese I Ching, this very ancient text that isn't really a text; it's a living text. And I'm sure we'll maybe talk about this, but those 64 codes of the I Ching, I realized with a 64 code, they were direct relationship mathematically and genetically to our DNA and to many other things in the universe, many other codes like the phi spiral that we see in nature, and the octaves, the 8 octaves of music, of the musical scale. And it's just embedded even in more recently in the work of Nassim Haramein and others, the understanding that the tetrahedral structure of space-time continuum itself is created out of these 64-fold structures. So it's kind of wild because it's everywhere. So when you're looking at this code, you're looking at a universal fractal pattern that underlies everything in the universe. And that helped me understand what had happened. So I had a framework, and it all came out of here, out of this work in the belly. And so I guess that's my way of bringing myself into this space and into this conversation through that experience, and that led to this work of the Gene Keys that helps us open up and see these heightened states through transforming, as Blue said beautifully, through transforming our lower shadow states and that's where you begin the work. So you have to do that work. You can't sidestep that really important step, and so for me, it was always the way to heaven is down, it's down into the belly. And so I've become a great lover of the belly, and I'm become more and more interested in the work of Zach and the understanding of what we're learning about the biome and what we're learning about that intelligence. And one thing I'll say as just to plant a seed that we can pick up probably later in the conversation is when I wrote the Gene Keys book, which took me 7 years, and in it I managed to encode the 3 days of my experience, but in a completely different way. In the middle of that process, I wrote one of the keys, the 55, Gene Key 55, and it was a freak one. It kind of exploded inside me, and inside it came this prophecy that kind of came out. And I was thinking, as I was writing, I was thinking, are you really going to write this into the book? But I just had to, and it was the prophecy of the future human, and it was a human where the intelligence of the human was through the gut, was through the belly, the solar plexus center, and that was where I had a kind of embodied understanding of that through my experience of being in the field without any resistance at all. So maybe you can imagine that, like just imagine there's not a single iota of resistance in your body or in your being. It was just gone, nothing, just pure light streaming through. And the light was intelligent, and the light came through the DNA, and the DNA was like that last little place where the code was kind of spinning in a vortexes, and it was the structure that held the light and was a transducer of light. And so those were all embodied understandings that I had at that time, and hopefully they'll help guide the rest of this conversation and inspire you. And Gene Keys is a kind of body of work that now is based in that. That's its goal, is to create that same experience, those awakenings, those epiphanies, those moments of beauty and awe that Zach was talking about, to kind of ripple out inside us. And they come in layers, and we have to get through the shadow material. We have to move through that process. And it's a hell of a journey, because it's literally the shit that's inside us. And that's the great metaphor of the gut. It's that we have to deal with our shit. And many of us don't want to.
For everybody.
Yeah. Many of us don't want to do that work. For a long time, people were just trying to get high, doing the transcendental meditation or taking the plant medicines and stuff, and they had not done this deep core shadow work inside ourselves. And so that's what I know. Blues work is all deeply embedded in that, and you're a warrior of that medicine. And so are you, Zach. So anyway, I think that's my opening shot.
Well played.
It's a beautiful reflection that, first and foremost, the answer has been hidden in plain sight. Like, it's been right here. And I think that it's so easy for us to sort of seek something outside of ourselves to get some sort of sense of wholeness. And we have been fed our entire lives that happiness lies just over the next horizon, just when we get the next thing. And this is actually feeding and going hand in hand with the over-consumerism on the planet. And yet we're constantly chasing and not finding essentially deep, fulfilling peace and happiness, and recognizing that it's actually in the stillness and turning our awareness inwards. And something that has really shifted my relationship with how I perceive this reality, and it kind of goes off of what you've shared, Zach, is that our five senses can also limit us and create this some sort of sense of disconnection with the people around us and nature at large. As my hearing has been slowly decreasing over quite a few years, what it's doing is it's activating me into a deep sense of feeling. And this all comes from the gut. That's that feeling when you first meet someone, you're like, or all of a sudden everything goes on high alert and a little bit like something doesn't feel quite right, even though from the five senses, everything seems to be okay. And so this is the invitation as we move through the journey from our head to our hearts and to our bellies, the second brain that we have, the intelligence of our intuition. And every single time we trust our intuition, it gets stronger and it's a muscle. And so with this sense being dampened, other senses of the extrasensory perception of feeling is being heightened. And so I would love to hear from you, Zach, around the gift of feeling it all and what that actually means. And as we're in sort of the sacred country and the sacred shit, how we are actually healing our body by giving ourselves permission to feel the crunchier emotions. What is that doing to our body when we give ourselves permission to die well?
You mentioned the second brain there, which has been something that's been kind of conjured up by the Western medical world to try to express how many neurons are in our gut lining. There's now understood to be hundreds of billions of neurons that innervate your gut lining, which seems like a very overexuberant effort of neurologic attention because there's only shit in the colon. And so why is there this massive neurologic dedication to listening into this space of the gut? And it's become quite literal in the last couple of years as a new form of microimaging has come possible, where we can actually image through a antibody tagged methodology in a living system of a gut, which is a very complicated ecosystem. We used to have to dissect things and cut them up, and then by that time you're trying to imagine what it was before you cut it up. But with this microimaging technique, we're being able to see the gut, and we're starting to realize that those neurons are not inside of the body waiting for information to stream through the epithelial kind of skin version that is your gut lining. It's a huge surface area. It's 2 tennis courts in surface area compared to the 1.5 meters square that my skin is. My gut covers 2 tennis courts. And it's a super thin lining of cells. It's half the width of a human hair. So imagine plucking a hair, slice that in half, and that's your barrier between all of the shit and your immune system that lies right deep to that cellophane thin level that's thinner than a human hair. And so that barrier we thought was the holy of holies. Everything outside is outside, everything inside is you. And with this neural imaging, we suddenly realized that all these afferent nerves, billions of them, are poking through that cellophane into the microbiome, into the literal mess of the gut. And this defies all understanding of how neurons work. We thought that neurons were the most sensitive cells in the body, had to be protected between the blood-brain barrier and all this terror of the outside world. To understand that they could poke through and sense into the chaos of the gut is just transforms, again, our question or our belief systems about the immune system and sterile humans and all of this. It is listening, billions of nerves, and they're called afferent nerves because they don't send out information, they absorb information. The number of neurons that cover that 2 tennis courts in surface area bundled together is the size of the brain of a dog that weighs about 40 or 50 pounds. So picture a German Shepherd. That brain of the German Shepherd is how many neurons are dedicated to listening to the microbiome. And you realize that brain is actually larger than the cerebellum that does our musculoskeletal, larger than our visual cortex. So all the 5 senses are dwarfed by the amount of neurologic activity we have to these other senses down here. And so all of this is really reorienting our understanding of what does it mean to be human. But I love this little thought experiment that has developed in me, which is the CPU chip, that is your gray matter up here, just does pattern recognition, and it helps organize inflowing information and spit it back out. But it doesn't create any of the original information. It can't. And the CPU chip that's in your phone or on your laptop, or nobody has a desktop anymore, but these old computers had these CPU chips, and they get faster every 2 years. It's this Moore's law or whatever. And so you've got these really fast sensory processing systems, these CPU chips in computers that allow them to do faster and faster calculations of more and more, taking more and more information faster. And so It turns out that the CPU chip of your phone has never figured anything out or had an original thought. It's simply an organization tool for all the information. But the computer on your desk has never written the term paper. The keyboard had to enter all that information to create enough disparate data for the pattern to occur and then be spit out on a printer that would then print that out, and you turn it in, you get your C- if you were me, and you'd move on through life. But the CPU chip didn't do it. The keyboard obviously did it. Except, have you ever seen a keyboard actually write a term paper? The fingers had to write the paper, and the fingers are obviously not part of the entire thing that we would call a computer. And so it turns out this is our CPU chip. The keyboard is our gut. And the fingers typing on there is not part of the computer system. The fingers typing into your brain is the most diverse ecosystem that any mammal has ever sensed. Recent data is showing us that the human colon is very uniquely designed to hold the highest amount of ecological biodiversity of any other colon in the mammals. And the mammals dwarfed the biodiversity of the birds or the reptiles. And so the march of life and the iterative beauty of nature in multicellular life forms has really been a process of learning how to build anatomy to maximize the amount of ecosystem held within one organism that would report enormous ecosystem data into a single CPU chip. You are designed to take in more information of nature, to be the voice of nature better than any species in history. And that's why you're here. And now, as we come into this era where we start to realize we dedicated so much effort to the CPU chip that we've disregarded the source of the information. And as we come into respect for what lies within us, for it is an immediate and connected relationship to the ecosystem around us. In fact, we now know you cannot divorce this ecosystem from that ecosystem around you without an immediate failure of the system. And this is what's happened in modern civilization, as we call it, is we isolated this gut, this ecosystem from that around us. And the march of technology has systematically separated us from the ecological biodiversity of the world. And we're unique in that space as intelligent creatures. We're unique that we maximize monotony and monoculture at every touch. All of the other keystone species, as they have been termed, lions, whales, sharks, elephants, none of them create monoculture. All of them, in every breath they take, in every step they set on this precious earth, maximizes the biodiversity below them and around them. Lions and the wolves of Yellowstone, you put them back in, the Yellowstone wolves, and the river started flowing. It's not just the animal life, it's the freaking river start pumping when a wolf is present. That's a keystone species. And in contrast, we step into a space and we destroy the soil and the ecology and we kill until nothing bigger than us. And then we try to co-opt all life until it's convenient for us and maximizes our space and all of this stuff and this proprietary belief of ownership and all of this. And for this, we are not a keystone species. And so it begs the question of what the hell are we? What are we if we're not a keystone species? What are we here to express? And I think this is our metamorphosis, because ultimately you've never sat there and screamed at a 2-year-old or an 18-month-old of like, you haven't written a damn term paper, you know, what the hell is your worthwhile? Like, you're taking up all this food and breath in the house and you're doing nothing around here. You just sit around and play and blah. And nature acknowledges that we are the youngest child on the block. And we are in this infancy. And nature is freaking patient with us. And she's full of grace towards us. And every time we mature a little bit and we take our first little stumbling steps and we hold on to the edge of the coffee table and we peer over and be like, oh my God, huge new world. There's so many things on that coffee table that I would like to put in my mouth. That's where we are right now, as we are just peeking over the top and we want to put it all in our mouth because we have a huge 5 senses that say, oh, yum, it's so delicious to be human. And so we are in this space where nature has been patient with us, and I think it's likely that the horrors that we have played on one another, the horrors that we've played on our nature, were also by design, and were not a mistake, and are ultimately part of the poetry of this next chapter that's going to unfold, because the genes love, destruction.
So let's go into this next chapter that is unfolding, and to get a little bit of a deeper understanding beyond just what we feel. But now we've gone into the biome, or the intricacies of our bodies. And there's so much as an infinite conversation. And it talks about in the Gene Keys around 2027. And that was a significant year that was placed in the Gene Keys book alongside 2012. And I think we can all probably agree that 2012 was a giant shift in the way that we experience being human, and a shift in consciousness, and people started waking up left, right, and center. And so I'm curious from your perspective, why 2027, and what it is that you feel like we are moving into in this new epoch.
Okay, thank you.
We're all thinking it.
Okay, so the way that this works, if you don't know what Blue's talking about, is in the Gene Keys, it's a way of mapping the 64 grid around a circle. And it's really interesting when you do that. And you place, traditionally the I Ching was seen as like a square, a block. But actually when you place it in a circle and you put it around the wheel, then you can adapt it to lots of different ways. And one of the ways you can look at it is through astrology. And because you can put it alongside the zodiac and alongside the movement of the planets and the spheres and all kinds of stuff. And it gets kind of interesting because then you're looking at the master genetic sequencing pattern of our Earth. And so you're looking at fractal patterns that are repeating themselves in cycles over and over and over again. And that's what the original I Ching was used for, as an oracle to help us understand cycles and therefore predict what's coming next if we know what's happening now. And we'd use our intuition alongside that. It's a very powerful system. And so when you look at like what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which is large planetary cycles, and you look at that in the Gene Keys wheel in these 64 segments, what you see is global cycles at work. So you see large global cycles that are broken down in sort of segments of around 450 years. And then there are much wider, larger segments, and you're looking at some of these patterns that, like the Vedas talks about 26,000 year cycles of the changing or the evolution of consciousness and those things. And that seems to be a very accurate, when you look at it through the Gene Keys, that's an accurate lens. And so when you look at all that, you don't need to understand it, but you look at all the mathematics of that and the angles and the trajectories. When you see where we are today in that map, you see a shift taking place around this time period where the precession of the equinoxes shifts us to another gene key, and so another kind of set of codes, a series of codes. It's not just one key; it's a series of codes. And this one's a particularly big one because the shift from where it's been to where it's going is very extreme. And so when the Gene Keys came to me, and as you can probably tell, I'm more of a poet than a scientist, and I see things through the right brain quite powerfully. What came to me was the image, as I was writing that Gene Key 55, the image of a dragonfly, and the allegory of the dragonfly's transformation, which we all know, we're very familiar with the butterfly, obviously, and the caterpillar. And dragonfly is kind of interesting because it lives most of its life underwater as a nymph and as an underwater predator. So for 2 or 3 years, it lives underwater. It doesn't know anything else. It's a very successful predator, kind of scary. And then at a certain point in its life, there's a series of molts that take place inside it, of transmutations. And those are kind of silent and kind of quite hidden. And not a lot happens on the outside, but on the inside, things are changing. And at a certain point, there's some sleeping gene that's triggered in each dragonfly, And it does something completely unique that it's never done before. And it finds a stalk of grass or, something, and it climbs up out of the watery environment into the sunlight for the first time ever. And it must be thinking, what the hell am I doing? But it does it anyway. And then as soon as it gets out of the water and it's clinging to this thing, to the stalk, the sun starts to work on it. The heat, the light, the mutation that's inside the dragonfly starts to kind of happen very, very fast. If you ever watched this, it's an incredible thing to watch. It's like 2 or 3 hours. And then this old creature, it starts to kind of flake off, and then the thorax starts to uncurl, and it forces its way out. And there's this system of spiral dynamics that takes place. It's actually hydraulics, because the water inside the creature, inside the insect, is actually pumping through the action of the sun. Is actually pumping the thorax to unravel and the wings to unfurl. And it pushes its way out through that hydraulic pressure. And then it's sort of sitting there with these wings, and it's a completely different creature. For one thing, it's no longer gray. It's like suddenly iridescent, and it's a dragon. And then there's a puff of wind when it's dried off, and it's off, and it's gone. And it's this incredible miracle of aerodynamic design, that just takes to the air, and suddenly it has another entire life. Anyway, that little allegory, for me, captures our process right now. Like, what is on the other side of this shift, as through this 2027, and it doesn't mean it's 2027, we're all going to get there, and then suddenly we're all like free. I want to make that clear, like these are markers. So 1987 was a marker, harmonic convergence, and then 2012, melodic resonance, I call that. And that was another marker. And then 2027, rhythmic symphony, that's another marker. And so that's a period, and it happens to be that, for myself and probably you as well, Zach, that those were like times of our awakening, or of my awakening anyway. And in that period. So it's a transitionary period that leads to a kind of new epoch emerging. And that epoch, I think what's important about it is that what's coming cannot barely be imagined. And it was that state that I experienced, that I tried to explain earlier, where there was no resistance in my being, and I was interconnected to all other beings. That is our future consciousness. That is our present consciousness, but it's dormant. And it's going to be triggered, and it's going to then become a permanent state. And the way I understand it is, and this is the prophecy part, is that it will appear as a series of genetic mutations that come into certain children and then start to spread throughout our genome. And then those children, as they grow, will have this networked consciousness through the belly, through the gut. So I don't understand no one understands the mechanics of or the chemistry of what that might look like. I'd love to hear some of your ideas on it. And I'd like
make
to
something happen.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
But anyway, that's the story. I'm a storyteller. And I think that the key point is that it is of a different dimension to what we know now, and that it's coded in to our species. And when you look back in the history of human evolution, or of the evolution of creatures, you see, as Zach said, mutation loves chaos. It thrives in extra heat. It needs heat. It needs warming. It needs things to heat up. And that's on many levels. It needs crisis, because that's the environment in which old patterns are shattered and new ones emerge. Just like the dragonfly, coming out into the sun and then just suddenly experiencing heat and light, and that hydraulic kind of transformation that takes place. So I think it's, when you study the gene keys, for example, and you get into it and you see these words for the cities, these words for the heightened states of consciousness, you really have to get your head around them and your heart around them. You go, wow, I'm not going to be like laboring under these shadow patterns. I'm actually a being of infinite compassion, or I'm an ecstatic being, or I'm a blissful being, and those are permanent states, not just like little flashes. In the future consciousness or in this next human, they're permanent states. And you think, well, how are you going to get anything done? Well, I don't think we are going to get anything done. I think the next phase of our evolution is much less about doing and much more about being. So,
So based off the technologies of the gene keys, for us to get into these states, it's down, in, and then up. And as much as I love a good little light and love, I think that the actual, true, sustainable conversation here is actually really facing off with all that's not serving. And where I look around me, I see so many systems that are not serving life. And they're in place that are cannot be sustained in the collective consciousness moving into this heightened state of awareness. So, Zach, I'd be curious to hear your perspective of what does that look like as we continue to move forward. And of course, it's impossible to say exactly how it looks, but also based off of how is it feeling, or outside of us getting into this ecstatic state or the potential of it, what do you believe has to be moved through? Just as the Gene Keys talks about, we go down into the shadow first before we can get to the gift, before we can get to the city. What do you believe that this looks like? And from that place, how can we prepare ourselves to support each other and to come together and recognize like we're all floating down sort of a river in the same direction, but we're all in our own individual canoes here. And so it's about bringing our canoes together and supporting each other with the times that we have ahead.
I mean, the good news is that all those systems that aren't serving us are human. That's a relief. And so I haven't found a natural system that isn't serving us, which is a huge relief. And so all natural systems serve life at a fundamental law level. This is the way that life occurs, is life always supports the birth and rebirth of more life, and it honors beyond all other forms of life biodiversification. And so the law of genetics is adaptation. And the purpose of adaptation is for creating more biodiversity. And the result of more biodiversity is better adaptation, which speeds the more biodiversity, which increases the adaptation. So that's how life has emerged, probably in any ecosystem in the cosmos. But certainly here on this planet, we can see the single cellular life that emerged about 4 billion years back. And it took roughly 1 billion years or so before we started to see the relationship between single cells starting to organize themselves into hyphae and pseudo-hyphae that would become the kingdom of the fungi. And so we moved from bacteria to fungi over a 1 billion year period of this rugged individualism of all these different species kind of starting to met out biodiversity through adaptation. And for those first about 1.5, 2 billion years, it was a sharing economy that allowed for the biodiversity to occur. One bacteria had to bump into another bacteria to share a new gene. Genes are iterating all the time. The apparatus that spells a nucleotide sequence that would then be stored as DNA is by design, I believe, very sloppy, and it's misspelling things all the time. And therefore, we have other enzymes that are DNA spell checks, and the spell checkers are running at an extreme rate, and they're so precise at correcting those misspellings. But we do things that are kind of clever in that we sometimes will put genetic sequences in a space where the spell checkers aren't happening. And so we can actually preserve new sequences of misspelled genes, and we package these in things called exosomes that we then secrete from a bacteria or from a human cell, and we pass that out into the environment in hopes that that might be helpful to somebody. And so we're misspelling things all the time with the curiosity of what could come next, basically. And so when we see a planet that is, I mean, honestly, this place, round of applause, by the way, for our hosts. Where are our hosts here? There they are back there. Thank you for this yard. What a stunning place, because it is literally an expression of what we're talking about. This is a genetic expression of possibility that has been iterating for billions of years. And so from the eucalyptus to, the grasses over here, these native grasses that have root systems that are 3 to 5 feet deep, to these incredible purple flowers up the hillside, some variation of species that has imagined itself into existence for absolutely no useful purpose, like a cone of flowers like that. Like, to what end? To be beautiful? Yes, exactly. And so nature is iterating and iterating and iterating. And so the exciting thing is you were iterated into existence. And I get so amazed by the power of extinction. The last extinction was 55 million years ago. It was death of the topsoil. And now if you followed any of my stuff, you know that we're in the 6th great extinction from death of the topsoil. This always causes extinction. When you wipe out the microbiome, we lose biodiversity, which means we lose the input of neurologic thought, basically, and all life starts to shut down because it can't remember why it exists, really. And so we go through this suicide mechanism that we call extinction. And we're in the midst of this as humans right now. And as biology, we've lost about half of life on Earth over the last 50 years. And we're losing about one species every 20 minutes to extinction. And so at this speed of extinction that's sped up 10,000-fold, 10,000x more rapid extinction over the last 50 years. So this rate of extinction, disappearing. Every one of those species in its last moments is like, holy cow, this is going to be amazing. I just got a new idea of what it could be like. Because this current iteration can't be supported by this planet anymore, but the next planet might support this. And so every species that goes extinct is leaving behind a record of possible genetics of the next iteration of life. And that's what happened 55 million years ago. We had a planet that was full of dinosaurs, reptiles, went extinct, and we got birds. And we got dolphins. And we ultimately got monkeys. And then Homo sapiens. That's the iterative genius of nature, is that nature did not mourn or grieve the Triceratops, which is, if I had created Triceratops, man, I would have been pissed at that asteroid. I'd been like, I'm going to recreate that stuff. We are getting Triceratops back, and that T-Rex was awesome coming back. This is like, absolutely. We still do this. Like our movies, like how many, times have we iterated the Jurassic Park? We're like Jurassic Park 5 now. Like we keep recreating T-Rex because it's so cool. Yeah. The nervous system's so happy about T-Rex, and we've never seen one. It's like... Nature does not care about T-Rex. It is more curious about the next thing. And this is a deep lesson about how should we live. We need to stop grieving what has been let go of. And we need to start being really curious about what's coming. And so every relationship that you've let go of, every job you've let go of, every child you've let go of, every parent you've let go of, every elder you have lost, made space for the next iterative process. And in the stress that relationship left in your life, or that loss of an elder left, was new genetic potential for who you're going to become. And so the end, we need this pressure cooker because we misspell our genes for new potential, for new imagination to occur. And buried in our genome right now is all kinds of potential. And so the thing that gets me kind of wigged out about your little... By the way, you're a freaking scientist. Dragonfly? Like, can we just say that was a very scientific description of how a dragonfly comes to be? We also need to, it's actually a really important point, is I'm tired of being categorized as a scientist when there's artists on the stage that are not categorized as scientists. Art is the highest form of science, period.
And it's the artist's responsibility to make the revolution completely irresistible. Please and thank you.
And I would argue it's the only science that's done no harm. All of our other sciences have been exploited for harm. We created nuclear bombs from understanding of physics. We create weaponry out of just about everything that we've discovered in the chemical world. Art is, I think, humans' contribution to the beauty of nature that has done no harm. It has only added beauty. And so hats off to all the artists, which is every one of you are an artist. There's every one of us is an artist. And so just as we need to stop categorizing scientists as some, we need to stop categorizing some as artists. We are all artistic beings here to co-create. But if I may, I'm going to just dig a little deeper on this thing that you just talked about around the genetics are probably already there. The dragonfly is already in the larva. And so in that nymph that's swimming around for years, there's already a freaking dragonfly in there. All the genetics are there. And we're starting to realize how nonlinear the DNA is in its transcription. And so we used to think that a gene had to be, a sequence of nucleotides all lined up that would then translate into RNA and then leave the nucleus and then code a protein that would become something in your body. We're now finding out over the last 15 years of genomics that genes can create completely non-spatial relationships between nucleotide sequences to spell something new. And so a loop of DNA can come off a histone, which is how we bundle our DNA. Every cell, which again, if you picture a single cell, it's anywhere from a half to about a tenth of the width of a human hair. Inside of that thing that's a tenth of the human hair has a nucleus, which is now 50 times smaller than a human hair in its circumference. And inside of that is packed a meter of DNA. And so it just doesn't mathematically make sense how this is possible. But the way it's done is by wrapping that nucleotide sequence, that meter of DNA, around these little tiny balls called histones. So now imagine a ball of yarn of all this nucleotide that we call DNA all wrapped up. But to transcribe a single gene, you have to unwrap the whole damn ball until you find the gene that you want, and then you need to get that transcribed into RNA, and it goes and makes a protein. And we make about 1 billion new proteins per cell per hour. And so these balls of yarn are unwrapping and rewrapping and unwrapping it at billions of times a minute to find the right nucleotide sequence to become the protein that's needed for your new potential. You're birthing a new body constantly, and this genetic sequences are unburying themselves constantly. And we now know that a loop here, unbound from this little ball of yarn, can come and tag onto another loop that's sticking out here and then transcribe an RNA sequence that doesn't exist as a contiguous DNA signal. The human genome only has 20,000 contiguous genes, which is really a pathetically small number because a flea has 30,000 genes. And so is it really possible you're 2/3 as complicated as a flea? Your spouse probably says yes, absolutely possible. A fruit fly has 13,000 genes. So you sit between a flea and a fruit fly of your genetic sequences that are linear. What's happened in you, I think, is a nonlinear expression of reality. And so this new thing that forms as humans become the new thing is already sitting in our DNA. I strongly believe this. It's already written. And so when we hear of the 64 codons in the DNA, what the heck is a codon? Codon is something that codes for one of the amino acids that would then become a string of protein, a string of amino acids that would become a protein. And so you have just 64 different sequences of nucleotides that will spell 22 different amino acids, basically. And the 22 amino acids are like the Legos. Like you got 22 different shapes of Legos, and from that you can build 400,000 different proteins because you can rearrange those 22 Legos in all kinds of different ways. And so we are about to go through an experience that I believe is going to paradigm leap, because there's a theory that maybe there's actually 26 amino acids, not 22. And so if you suddenly found 4 new Legos, which is such a cool thing when you get that new box of Legos and it's a Triceratops and you've never had a Triceratops horn before and you're like, oh, this is going to be good. And suddenly your unicorns that you're building for your sister have 3 horns and it freaks her out. And you're just like, oh, the power of creativity because you had a new Lego. And so I think what's about to happen is we're not just going to spell new genes, we're going to spell new amino acids, which means we're going to make new proteins that have never seen before in biology, or if it's been seen before, it's been forgotten. And so we are about to remember our full potential and get a few new blocks in the playground, and we're going to start to arrange things differently. And I think the result of that ultimately is going to be an improvement in the amount of light energy that we can hold inside of a single human cell, which seems to be the whole secret to biology. And so the difference between biology, i.e. life, and physics is how much light energy can you concentrate in a small amount of space. So this is very similar to the colon. The more ecosystem biodiversity you can get into a cubic centimeter of colon, the more intelligent the pattern recognition becomes. In the same way, now at the physics level, the more light energy you can pack into a cubic micron of a single human cell, the more intelligence can emanate out of that system. And what holds the light energy inside of a cell is actually the water. In a completely inexplicable hydraulics thing that we've just heard about the dragonfly, that actually happens every trillionth of a second inside of a human cell. When you drink water, that liquid cannot enter a human cell as liquid. The second it passes a cell membrane, it has to become a gel because there's so much light energy inside of a human cell. That light energy is coming from a liberation of sunlight from the food that you consume when mitochondria get a hold of it. Mitochondria are tiny little bacteria that live inside your cells. So mitochondria are breaking the double carbon bonds in a glucose or fatty acid molecule, which was just a clever battery to store light energy that the chlorophyll put together to store sunlight in double carbon bonds through the chlorophyll. And so all these green leaves around us is storing sunlight through the most efficient battery ever developed, which is a double carbon bond. And you're eating all of that. And so all the food you're eating is some form of glucose and fatty acids repackaged in fancy ways that look pretty to actually light you up. And so you are attracted to foods that carry an enormous amount of light density. And when you consume that, it's liberated. And then we now know that a cubic centimeter of mitochondria inside your cells liberates sunlight 10,000 times brighter than the cubic centimeter of the surface of the sun. And so what's the difference between physics and life? 10,000 times brighter. Life is the brightest thing in the universe. 10,000 times brighter than a star. Who are you? You're the brightest thing in the galaxy. You're the brightest thing in the universe, maybe. You're here to light up the cosmos. And that light energy is held within water structure that is determined by the proteins that are suspended within the cellular state. And so when we say we're going to add 4 more Legos to a little field of just 22, I believe the purpose of those 4 will be maximize the amount of crystalline structure that we call liquid crystals inside of your cells. And those liquid crystals suspend nucleotides, which are just very basic, tiny little peptide structures that hold a memory of the possibility of physical form. We call it DNA, but it's just a very lifeless structure. And it has no double helix to it. It has no fanciness to it until it's suspended in the liquid crystals inside the cell. A double helix only occurs if the DNA is wrapped in water in a crystal state. And so DNA unravels immediately, dissociates into just a glob if you dissolve the liquid with gel state of the cell. And we see this happen all the time in cell biology. We can add common herbicides like glyphosate, which we're breathing and everything else, and we add that to a human cell, and it turns back into liquid. You lose the gel state. You lose the crystalline structure of the human cell when it's exposed to herbicides. And for that, the DNA unravels. It can't hold its form, and the cell starts to go into apoptosis and cell death very rapidly. And so it's a beautiful possibility that we are about to go through a complete form shift because of new proteins being created that can hold more crystalline form, that will hold more light energy, that will rearrange in a new way the genetic code of nucleotide sequences. And I have a theory that this relates to the divine feminine and the way in which it starts to express itself within us. As we start to balance the divine feminine with the divine masculine and the energies between those two realms of physics, as they start to enter into the crystal structure of water, it's going to allow for something other than a double helix to occur. And I think we may be heading for a quadrihelix phenomenon where we get perfect sacred geometry and a new expression, and the nucleotides are held in a completely new way, and it can help us create a new phenomenon of life on Earth through this sixth extinction that was a necessary process to the journey.
So what you're saying is I'm just jumping in here and I want you to pick up on this,
please.
Blue. What we were saying last night, in fact, is that the dragonfly is already there. And so nature is actually engineering this through us, which is an intuition I've always had as well. So like, we are not separate from nature. It's a really important thing because it changes everything. Gaia is doing this to herself using us. That's a way of looking at it. Using us. We are pawns in the chess game of Gaia's next phase of evolution. And that doesn't kind of mean that we have to sort of just go, oh, well, and put my feet up and just climb on, the plane and fly to, wherever. And not saying you should or shouldn't do that, but it doesn't take away it takes away the guilt, but it doesn't take away the awareness, of doing the right thing. But it's a very liberating way of seeing this change, that it's being engineered for a higher purpose. And it's really important to kind of, and I want to say something as well, because we haven't really brought this up, is it looks pretty ugly as well. So what's coming looks really ugly. It looks like suffering will increase hugely, exponentially, particularly in the developing world. In those, countries, where the heat is going to become more and more intense. So I think it's really important to have that conversation as part of this conversation, so that we go forwards with our eyes open rather than being all idealistic, which is true. Yes, there is something beautiful taking place, but it's going to take place through intense suffering, I think. And both of those things we have to hold. So I don't know if you want to go down that route a bit, Blue. I'd love to hear.
Oh, I don't know anything about intense suffering for planets in Scorpio. Ultimately, there's the interconnected nature of what happens within happens without, right? And so we're talking about healing our relationship to the shadow, the crunchy, and the uncomfortable emotions that come up within our own psyche and our own experience. And at the same time, recognizing that all of this stuff that is being churned up with the astrology and within our own personal evolution is that the way to the heightened state of awareness, the clearing of our lens, is down and in. And so, of course, if this is what's happening on a micro level, this is also going to happen on a macro level. And so this is why I think that we can't get enough safe spaces to allow ourselves to feel, and the importance that we cannot do this alone. Like, this is the time that our soul family is coming together. This is the time that we are finding those that feel, supporting us to feel our nervous system relax around them, that we feel like they're home in human form, and actually recognizing, instead of what can I get from this experience, what can I contribute? And that mindset is going to ensure that we operate like a hive of bees. And there is like the way that I set the intention with creating events or an experience is please can we weave like a shoal of fish? And it's recognizing with the shoal of fish, yes, they're individual fish, but they weave with this unspoken knowing that we are in this together. And this is the importance, I think, over the last couple of events that with the podcast with Joe and with this experience, is that we're bringing us together right now, and it is extremely important. And recognizing also that there's going to be really uncomfortable experiences, health crises that are happening within our own bodies, that all of this is churning up out of our physical bodies. And also for anybody that may have sat in an ayahuasca ceremony, like, the experience of like the purge is so uncomfortable, like vomit coming out of my nose, and I'm like, oh, and it's like it's such an uncomfortable feeling in the moment when that thing that I picked up when I was 5 years old that is not serving me anymore, that is purging out of my being because it's a belief system that is taking up space where love could potentially live. And I have to move it up and out of my body so that I can actually have space to rewrite a new story. And that story is founded in beauty, love, and unity, and connected with myself and with others. And so if the earth is our body, this is also what's happening with the earth, is she is purging. I personally believe that the earth is going to be fine. It's humanity that we're in question with. And this is why we get to have this tribe of transmuting this narrative around the soul wolf or the lone wolf now. And it's actually about coming together and recognizing that your pain is my pain and your wins are my wins, and coming into this connected nature of the way that we weave within others, and recognizing all judgment is rooted in self-judgment. And when somebody else is going through a process, we say thank you, because they're transmuting maybe not just for us, but for the collective as well. And so this is what we're really moving into, is that we do need each other. And I use the word need lightly, and we need each other. Like, this is important. And we're transcending this whole experience that there's like some sort of person that sits at the top of the pyramid and barks orders down to the rest of us, and recognizing that actually we're moving into a circle, that every single person holds an important piece to the puzzle. Every single person is extremely important. And that there's no one's better than somebody else, that we all have our own unique channel, our own connection to something greater than ourselves. And it's when you give yourself the permission to access that uniqueness, is then when the permission slip gets handed out for others to access their uniqueness. But every single person has a fingerprint. Every single person has a unique channel to something greater, that when we can allow ourselves to get out of our own way and allow it to move through, we start handing out permission slips to every single person we come into contact with to find your own unique piece as well. And this is what's going to take, is going to get curious enough to listen to our bodies, to listen to our guts, to listen to our heart, mind, and soul, to start to allow ourselves to connect with ourselves mentally, physically, spiritually, sexually, financially, and multidimensionally. Our relationship with any distortion that may live within inside of our body that has not started with ourselves, but has been passed on from our mother and our mother's mother and our fathers from our father's father, and it goes really deep in our lineage. But being curious enough to ask that is not resonant. May I be the vessel that transmutes this out of my body, so that I can make more room for love, and recognize that my vibratory state in this moment is the very thing that is contributing to the collective feeling. And when I end the wars within my own mind, I end the wars on this planet, or I help contribute to ending the wars on this planet. And that's why it's going to take all of us. It cannot be one person sitting on a podium or that has the answer. It's actually reconnecting our relationship to the divine that lives within all of us. And it requires beyond the five senses into a state of listening, beyond the ears, listening to that which is needed in our bodies and healing our bodies and how we relate to the people around us. So there's a sacred responsibility, while at the same time honoring that the purge is here to teach us and to make more room for that which is to come, which is the new human. So we get to do this together. So with that being said, we are in a time frame. So I'd like to open up a couple of Q&A if anybody has any questions. Mona, if you'd like to come up into this microphone over here.
Breaking down almost everything that I've heard the three of you say, in my mind, it's all about information transfer and the creation of context. And Ram Dass very simply and eloquently said that this whole thing was about self-awareness, and that self-awareness had two components, self and awareness, and that the awareness piece can begin at the self but expands. And something that I sit with often that actually keeps me up at night is, where is the line where the responsibility that I have to keep my vibration high can turn into isolating, can turn into me shutting down my ability to continue creating context, to continue expanding my sense of awareness. Because we exist in a community that is very siloed. And I went to a protest in Venice and I didn't see anybody that I knew, and everybody I know lives there. And it was about the reality and the suffering that's actually present in our backyard. And I struggle understanding, okay, I need to care for this vibration. And I need to also understand what's happening in the world because it's also happening to me. And so I wanted your take on how can we navigate that better, considering also that the information ecology that we exist within is also radically going to change with AI. We're adding another factor of information transfer that's going to complicate things even further. And so how do we dance? Where is that line? Does that make sense?
I'll jump in, I guess. I think I could tie this back to that 2-year-old toddler or 1-year-old trying to learn how to walk, whatnot. When we look around at humanity and then lose hope for the condition of our fellow humans or our disconnect from them or all of this, it's like a bunch of 3-year-olds in preschool together being so disappointed in one another. Like they get home and they're crying. They're like, somebody took my toy and blah, blah, blah. And the parents just like, yeah, a bunch of 3-year-olds, like expectations are low. And so we need to remember when we look around at the human condition, none of us have made the phase shift here, right? We're working towards it. We can feel it coming, but we haven't shifted, and we have to have an enormous amount of grace for one another for the lack of completion of that transformation event to occur. And the experience that I've had this past year in Africa has really radically changed my whole state of being around witnessing true wildlife. The version of wildlife we get in the U.S. is anything but. And you go to Europe, it's even worse, right? Europe hunted all of its species into extinction basically 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And so you don't have wildlife in Europe. You go to Africa and you are in the origin story of humanity. First of all, you're in the origin story of all life came out of that single Rift Valley energy. And so there is one birth canal for all biodiversity on the planet, which I find very, very interesting. And so the more time I'm in Africa, I'm like, my God, this is it. This is a planet expressing a vaginal canal and ultimately a uterus where it creates biodiversity. This is the iterative journey begins here. And in that little weird zone between South Africa and Botswana and Zimbabwe down there, before you even get up to Ethiopia and the Rift Valley, you have like 2/3 of the planet's genetics expressed in a single zone between the Kruger Canyons to National Park there. And so this one space contains 2/3 of the genes of the planet. And you're just like, how is this possible that it's there? And you see whole mountainsides exploding with like peace lilies. And you forget like those aren't ornamentals that we took all over the world and planted out in a yard to look nice. Entire mountains are expressing peace lily out there. And so we have to be in awe of nature's capacity. But what happened to me there is I got witnessed by nature, by raw wild life for the first time in my life. And this was a huge reversal of the story that I told you earlier, because I told you had 5 senses and you stare at sunsets like nobody else. But there are keystone species that are capable of observing your wildness that you don't even know exists. You only know the human 5 senses version of yourself. And at midnight, first night in Africa, I came face to face with these 2 white lions. White lions are the largest lions in nature. They're about 550-pound males, about 30% larger than a yellow lion. Massive 2 white lions meet me feet away from me in the full moon, and I'm frozen just by the biologic phenomena of being around this much energy. I cannot move a muscle for the near hour that this moment existed. And so that time was the first time I had been witnessed, because I have so many defense mechanisms to make sure other humans don't see me. I have an egoic shield that is trained over a 200,000-year process to be superstar and making you not see me. I've developed a way to shine that shield such that when you look at me, you think you're seeing me, all you're seeing is your own reflection. And so we walk around thinking we see beautiful humans. And when wild lions look you in the eye and remind you of who you are, you realize you missed the entire story of your life, because you are a wild freaking creature. And you didn't come here to be contained. You didn't come here to be contained by 5 senses or anybody else's laws or some sort of marriage construct. You are a freaking wild beast. And you are beautiful, and you are frightening in your capacity because the lion remembers you. And it sits there and says, hell yeah, you are back. And you showed up right now at the tipping point of all things. I'm freaking glad you came. Let's party. Let's get this thing on. Let's amp this thing up. You are a wild creature. And I was forever changed by that night because it turns out in physics, there's something called the observer effect. That when you actually see an atom, it changes its entire spin. Its direction immediately goes 180 degrees the other direction. That lion saw me and I changed direction completely. You are a wild creature that has been tamed in the mind to believe you are something less than you are. And the minute you are seen, you will change direction and you will overcome the darkness and you will vomit the final vomit and you will move into your light. And that will happen when you allow yourself to be seen. And I guarantee you that will not be a human that you will let see you first. It's going to have to be a wild creature. So go find some wild and let yourself be seen. Trees are very good at this. Let the trees see you. Just let the tree see you. And sit there and be seen. Lay under that tree and let yourself be seen. Get naked under that tree and just be like, this is it. This is all I got. And then the tree will start to remember you. And when you see how wild you are, when you see how beautiful you really are, you will just be so humored that you believe that 2 years old was your maturation point. You're ready to graduate to kindergarten very soon, very soon.
We have time for about one more question, unfortunately, because it's quite late. Sorrel, would you like to come up and ask a question?
I waringly put my hand up, not knowing if I was actually meant to share it, and the fact that you chose me. It's not really a question. However, I was just in the presence of a lot of very powerful people over the last week or so. Founder of Calm, billionaire company, $2 billion company. So many very influential individuals. And they spoke so much about AI, and I'm glad it was already mentioned a little bit. And one thing that was shared was really powerful for me to hear. And essentially, the people that were speaking of AI and the power that's coming through now in this realm is going to mean that there's a lot of us being replaced, lots of intellectual ways of being as a human is going to be shifting. And one person spoke actually about the atrophy of the brain because it won't be needed as much anymore. And what is going to be left over and what is going to be the strength of humans that remain is the visionary creatives, the ones that are able to tap into the soul and the gut and bring something forth. And those are the surviving humans. So that's the only thing I thought was really relevant to this conversation, speaking about the gut and less in the mind. So if there's any comment on it, otherwise I just wanted to share that piece because I think it's a really important conversation in the world right now too.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to say some closing things inspired by that and the previous question, which I heard another question inside that question, which is, for me, it was like, what should we do? Which is a really great question. And I think you answered that by being wild. Go and find our wildness. But also part of that wildness is our creativity. And what AI may do is it may solve some problems and it may also create more problems. And it may take away a lot of that creative process. You know, and the thing about the creative act is it's not the results. The AI can come out with a result just like that, you know, and people will no doubt make lots of money out of that and lots of great creative things. But it's the process of creation that is the key, not the product. So that's part of the answer of what do? We keep creating. Mm-hmm. And part of that creating is also relating. You know, I had this wonderful conversation with this Aboriginal man, Tyson Yunkaporta, wrote a wonderful book called Sand Talk. Mm-hmm. And he's a wild man. You want to meet a wild man? I mean, the only reason he gave me a kind of time of day is because I'm a wood carver, and I wrote to him and I said, I love you. I wrote to him, I said, I love your book, and wasn't expecting to get an answer, but every now and again, if I read a book and I love the author, I write to him. Anyway, I said, I love that you created an artifact for every chapter before you wrote it, you know, and by the way, what kind of wood did you use for that bent branch boomerang? And anyway, he said, and he said, well, I'm going to give you the time of day because there's a code among wood carvers. And anyway, so I had this lovely interview with him that I was going to publish. I just couldn't. It was too full of swearing and kind of cursing and this wild man. And anyway, at one point we were talking about, I said, you know, your unbroken lineage of 40,000 years and your indigenous people. Incredible. How is it that you managed to maintain that lineage? And he said relationships. Because they don't write anything down, right? So there's no written evidence. It's all maintained through relationships. Everything. So that's how you maintain a lineage. That's how you maintain, and that's what we're going to have to do in the time ahead. Build, not bunkers, relationships. Go on building relationships, go on creating. If we can help others while we're doing that, even better. You know, if we can help people in struggle and in suffering, even better. But that's the key, is, you know, it's another question that people have often, I've heard people often ask wise people, you know, or great teachers, you know, and the question is like, why do all this meditation when there's so many problems in the world? You know, why are you doing all this, teaching all this stuff? And the answer I've heard is always the same, and I kind of agree with it, is my interpretation of it is that action, unless it's coming from ecstasy, is not correct action. So you need to find that wild, abandoned nature inside yourself, that creative being that wants to be of service, but isn't so much of a kind of, what was it you called it last night? It wasn't an activist. It was a kind of, it wasn't a reactivist, you said. Yeah, it was a true activist as opposed to a reactivist. Because the action can't come from fear or frustration or anger. It has to come from passion and ecstasy. You know, then it's the right action. So you have to continue in your awakening process, because otherwise you can't activate this gut. And you won't be able to follow your gut. And that's all we have, following our gut. In the times ahead, that's all we have. And we have these beings coming in. We have this like massive storm coming. Gene Keys would call it the ring of the whirlwind. You know, and I had this image of like this, you know, sitting on a porch looking at the sunset, you know, isn't that beautiful? And then a massive tornado behind, you know, and you're just looking here and you don't know this thing's coming. And that's the case of this planet right now. This thing's coming and everyone's looking the other way. Most people. So we have to kind of really meet it. And right now I'm looking at these like kids coming in and babies coming in and being born. I'm thinking like, why would you choose to be born now? And I'm thinking like these must be big wave surfers, you know, like that's the only explanation I've got of a child incarnating now, because, you know, they must be specialized souls that have these special boards that and their skill is for those massive tsunamis. Either that or they're mad. So, you know, really that's what we're doing here. And I think all of this community and these communities around the world are networking to kind of create the preparation ground for this chaos that's coming, I think, and creativity and following our gut is really not. There's not much more that we need to know than that. So the creative act is the key, and I hope we can pass that on. I mean, I look at my children, and they're already using AI, and my son is using it to help him with his exams, and everyone's doing it. The teachers haven't cottoned on yet. I mean, it's hilarious. They just don't realize that all these kids are just having their things written for them, and it's hilarious. And it just makes me laugh. And so that's what we can't lose, the creative process itself. And because that's where the juice is. That's where our wildness is. That's what keeps the microbiome going, that creative, extending ourselves, stretching ourselves into new areas, new places, new inside ourselves. That's...
I think I can.
That's what ecstasy.
I think I can set you up for an awesome closure on this one, because I think this is such an important thing. What are we supposed to do then? Like if it's big wave surfing time, what are we going to do? And ultimately, I think the answer is we're doing it right now. We came together today, sight unseen, not really sure what was going to emerge, and we decided to spend time together. And what is emerging here is a new awareness of the power of humanity when it steps into its wild nature and when it renaturalizes to its full potentials to create something that's within us that's never been expressed before. But when I'm listening to you, Richard, right there, I just get goosebumps of how terrifying that is, and how anything that we express from a state any other than ecstatic is wrong. To then live into a situation where we're only expressing from an ecstatic state is so disruptive and so dangerous. And there's no social construct or approval or acceptance of that state of being. And so I think the challenge we have is, can we follow Blue into this state of play and prayer that's so ecstatic that we start to accept each other to do it, And so this is really it is a state of play that we're going to have to start to allow. And we're doing it. You see new constructs of relationships, new constructs of expression of sensuality and sexuality happening. My kids' generation now in their 20s are all expressing something I could have never imagined when I was their age. And my grandson, who's in his early teens, is expressing something that my kids could have never imagined. And so the speed at which each new iteration, they're not even waiting a full generation to express something more wild, more free, more unconstrained than the rest. But the more unconstrained they are right now, the more they reject all the things, the more prone they are to depression and major depression and suicidality and terror, because there is nothing telling them that it's okay to live that free. And so I think as a community, we're going to have to start to create constructs and lexicons and gatherings that just say, all right, let's get ecstatic. Let's get into this space together and just create a judgment-free zone that begins at a deep state of reverence to each other person. So before you express ecstasy, can you come into a moment of just extreme awareness of how precious each entity is around us? And then we will more safely move into an ecstatic state. We risk harming one another greatly in our ecstasy if we do not begin at reverence. And so we'll begin there, and then we will ask forgiveness for the past and begin an ecstatic journey together that holds each other in that state of space, that state of awareness that you will complete yourself. I can't complete you. There's nothing I can show up in your life to be a partner or a person or a mentor or guru. There's nothing I can do to perfect the four-dimensional genome that you're about to express from the light energy that you're going to organize in your ecstatic state. That's going to be a self journey, but it can only be done if you are seen and allowed to be seen. And that's what the Course in Miracles ultimately concludes, is the moment that two human beings complete the masculine and feminine within themselves, they will be able to see each other for the first time. The reason we have the egoic shield up is because we believe ourselves to be incomplete and therefore vulnerable, and therefore we need a protection. And so we think of ourselves as masculine or feminine or some damaged version of it. When we complete that, we can set down the shield and the lion will see the lioness. And it says that when two human beings, actually see each other, there will be such a radical experience of beauty that the vibration of love will transmute the entire species. Two people have to see each other and it's done. And so what do we need to do? We need to create vessels by which we need to create environments, events, spaces in which we can all come into a safe, ecstatic state to complete ourselves, such that we could let down the shield and see one another, and then we will complete the journey and we'll be the new thing.
You have to take this away and just kind of, because you're the ecstatic.
Yeah, that's right.
No pressure then, right at the end. Click. I just don't think you can ever, ever, ever replace the human heart. No AI will ever replace the way that we love. And this is what we came here to remember. This entire life is designed for us to remember our oneness and our love. And I have witnessed miracles happen in my own personal reality. I can only speak off of the lens in which I've experienced. Is loving people creates miracles. And this whole experience is a byproduct of many, many micro moments made with love. And I have witnessed standing in front of somebody and just seeing them clearly and what that does. It doesn't even need to say anything anymore, but it's about the capacity that we can love without the judgment of our own our personal emotions, and to accept everything that presents itself is our capacity in which we can accept whoever it is that's standing right in front of us. And so the willingness to die well, and what I mean by that is the common theme that I have witnessed within others that are truly so inspiring to me, is that they've learned before they actually physically die to die well. And as Richard has shared and has lasted so deeply within the core of my being, is that enlightenment is a series of softenings. So that we do not find the gift in why the divine nature has presented whatever it is right in front of us, whatever it's emotion, situation, person, or relationship. We will only find the gift when we soften deeper into it. And that sentence or that perspective has allowed the softening in the most challenging moments that has presented such an incredible gift, that then that gift by nature just has to be shared. And that's all of our responsibility, our ability to respond to what is here right now and what is to come that we have really no idea because we've never seen before. But we remember in the core of our beings. And one of my teachers shared with me is that I don't know what the truth is, but I know what love feels like. And I follow that every single day. And so this is our ability to respond, our responsibility. Is every single day, in every single micro moment, asking myself, what would love do? Honoring everything that's present, softening deeper into it, and waiting for the miracle to unfold. But the beautiful thing about all of it, that it's actually here already. It's actually already here. The answer is hidden in plain sight. And it's about cleaning off our lenses enough to be able to receive what is already here as gifted to us, which is the greatest thing we could ever experience, which is life. Here, right now, look around us. This is our life. And it's here to be experienced and shared.
That's what you think.
You hope.
So, with that being said, to roll out of this sort of moment of the podcast, we're going to hear from a very special woman that has devoted her life to understanding the earth and geology, and devoted her life to listening to the patterns of the planet. And for Carla, Where you at, Carla?
To the left.
Yeah, she's gone.
She's over here.
Oh, right there. Hey, Mama. So Carla has been a geologist for many, many, many years and has been listening to the earth and her natural rhythms. And we just feel like it would be so appropriate for you to share your perspective to bring us in a closing of today's experience.
Thank you. Well, wow. How do I follow up all of that? As you were talking about, you guys are studying the body and the microbiome and all the details of the human condition and the human experience. My entire body of life's work has been really studying the earth. So I'm a geologist, a hydrogeologist, a biologist, and environmental engineer. And it's just been since I was a young, tiny girl, I just observed the world for as long as I could to find out how it all worked. And what I am kind of here to do at the end, as like almost the end bookmark of sorts, is to bring a little bit of reality in the everyday of what's happening to the earth, because all of this is critically important to be able to incorporate into your being as we feel all that we're feeling right now, which is scared and angry. And a lot of us feel responsible for what's going on in the climate. And I'm here to tell you that you're not responsible for what's going on with climate change entirely. So we have had 13 ice ages that have been so intense in how the world was frozen that if you were on the moon, you would have been looking at the earth and it would look like a golf ball. And there have been 13 warming periods where it was so warm on the earth that if you were looking at it from the moon, you wouldn't see one piece of white on the earth. And that's what the earth does. I've been studying it long enough to know it breathes and has a breath. It moves and has a precession. It has its days and its seasons of growth of things on it, and it has its time when it lets go. And we are in a period of time right now where we are going into a warming period. It's its natural rhythm. The Earth's natural rhythm started 12,000 years ago, and we're going into a warming period. And what humanity did unconsciously is that it just like putting some tea on the stove to heat up, and you would just put it maybe on warm or a little bit warmer, and then you would go take a shower. And when you came back, it would be boiling over. We unconsciously did a bunch of things that turned the heat up so high that we have compressed a 25,000 year process of warming up where things would have had the time to adapt into 100 years. And that's what we're seeing right now. That's the craziness that we're seeing of the species being gone, of trees and the wildfires and all the crazy ass stuff that we see going on the planet right now, including our behavior is crazy. So as we cut down forests, we're taking actually oxygen out of the planet. The oxygen ratio on the planet has been going down over the last 50 years. And that's because of all the trees. Trees give us oxygen and they eat carbon dioxide. So I've also been studying about the last 700,000 years of human behavior and how we made it through these last ice ages. We didn't start from a single cell every time an ice age happened or a warming time period. We made it through it. So how did we make it through those time periods? Humanity got together in ways that they lived in ways that we aren't living right now. And that is they lived in communities that supported each other in concert with nature. And that sounds like, maybe some la-la thing that you hear all the time. But the reality of it is what we haven't passed down from generation to generation is how to live in communities in concert with nature. We are living like it's the end of the Roman Empire or something. We order stuff from Amazon, we order a lipstick, and then 2 days later we order, a shirt. And we have these things delivered to us, and everything is in this beautiful thing where you can go to restaurants and drive across and go across the world and get in airplanes. And it's incredible freedom and creativity of what we created, but it's not in the natural rhythm of humanity. And so the opportunities that are coming up are stellar. It isn't us. I'll say one thing. I'm going to scare you guys for 1 second. So of all the climate models that I study them, every year I get the results of climate models from everybody who's doing climate modeling around the world. And they're starting to converge. And what they say is in less than 30 years, so if you bought a house right now, in less time than it would take to pay off your mortgage, it's going to average 135 degrees from Denver south along the southern part of the United States. So just take that in. What we're talking about, when they say climate change, they're not saying, oh, less trees and it's going to be a little warmer. I'm talking about 135 degrees south of Denver. Every architectural engineering firm in the country knows this. That's why we have $1 trillion infrastructure thing coming out. And what that means is that roads melt, tires melt, all infrastructure that's in the air starts to sag. Our way of life right now is not going to look the same in 30 years or less. It's going to really change. And you all are here because the message is really clear and it has to get out to as many people as possible, which is there's something that you can do. I have a book that I'm writing right now, and there's 100 things that you can do every day, just one thing that would take down the carbon just even enough to slow this process down a bit. And if I told you this one thing, it's a little crazy, but every text that you send takes as much energy as it takes to boil a cup of water. So if you think about, I won't go through the process of how that one text message goes from data center to satellite to tower to back and forth and back, that kind of thing. But it's a cup of water, just doing that. Or did you know that the average piece of produce in your store, I don't care where you live, if it's not bought locally, the average piece of produce travels 3,000 miles to get to your store. So when you buy too many apples or you buy a bunch of bananas and they go bad and you throw them out, that came 3,000 miles. Think of what the energy is for that. So there's a consciousness around these 100 things that we do every day that we don't know we're doing. So it's very, very easy things to know how to do. Just don't send one text a day. Don't send a text that goes liked. That text just boiled a cup of water. Or loved. We get you. If I send you something you loved, I'm assuming you're going to love it. So the opportunities are amazing. I just want you to know that for invention, creativity, for relationships, the way that we structure our societies and our towns, the way that our houses are going to be built, the way that we're going to be able to do energy in a correct way is all changing right now. And that's the exciting part. And the better part on top of that is, and I'll leave you with this because I'm only supposed to talk for 5 minutes, but the best part about it is that we know what we know from not only science, from Dr. Joe, from you brilliant people, is that it's in your mind. If you have a thought in your mind, you can create reality. If you live in fear and you walk around and you think, I don't know how I'm going to make it. When you have a fire, I had a fire, big, huge fire that came up my street in my yard and burned down 1,100 homes. When you have crises that will start to happen in your neighborhood, to your family, somebody you're going to go into fear. You have got to keep the image of what I'm talking about is that we're going to make it. You guys are going to make it. The people who have the knowledge to get through this time period with practical things. Where do I find water? How do I live in a house and have my own indoor growing deal? How do I share food with the community? How do I not have to be on the internet all the time? How do I have my own heat because I'm going to have solar? There's a million things that are going to come out that will allow you to live off the grid so you're not beholden to it. And you're going to live in smaller communities that help feed each other. You've got to hold that image in your heart, in your mind, because that vibration, even if it's 1% of us that believe that can be true, will be that 1% that makes it through this crazy ass geologic time that I'm excited to go through myself. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I love that. But I cannot let it end here. So I'm so sorry. I know you were supposed to be the bookend, but this is classic Zach, maybe. But you just mentioned something really important, which is we compressed 25,000 years into 100 years. And what we've been witnessing in human biology in our laboratory, as well as in farm fields around the world in our farmer's footprint regenerative processes, we can compress 100 years into 1 second in regards to healing. We can heal faster than you can possibly imagine. And the reason why we have climate models that predict all of this stuff is because we have chemists and biochemists and all of this working on this. And as a chemistry problem, we will be 135 degrees, no question. In fact, that's the average surface temperature of an average farm in the Midwest today is 135 degrees on the soil temperature in a Midwest farm under conventional farming practices. It's already that hot. And so that's a chemistry problem. The chemistry of there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere, all this true. All of it's true. It's going to be horrible. We're going to bake the whole thing. It's going to be a disaster if we stay in chemistry. But if we do biology, we can transform the entire equation. And I would argue that the vast majority of climate change algorithms aren't counting the power of biology because they're not witnessing the power of biology in their metrics because biology is disappearing at a rate that's so fast. And so there's a belief that it's the CO2 that's causing the warming when in fact it's the extinction of biology that's accelerating that, and CO2 is only the symptom. And so CO2 is not the cause of climate change in my biologic perspective, because CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere is exactly what happens to a human being when they go into emphysema. Their CO2 just starts climbing in the bloodstream and they start to fail as biology and they start to die, not because there's CO2 in their bloodstream, but because they can't breathe because the lung is disappearing. CO2 in the atmosphere is the symptom of stopping breathing. We have our knee on the neck of a planet that likes to breathe. And it is screaming, I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. And the CO2 climbs. I cannot breathe. I cannot breathe. And we point at each other. They're doing it. They're doing it. We're doomed. All we have to do is take our knee off the neck of the planet, and it will take a massive breath. And we are poised right now to take that breath because we are at a 7,000-year natus of North Africa. Every 7,000 years, North Africa goes green. And it's the biggest grassland in the world. And when it goes green, Saudi Arabia goes green. And when it goes green, Siberia goes green. And when it goes green, northern China goes green. 1/3 of the planet is about to go green if we take the knee off the neck of the planet. And so Project Biome is the nonprofit we've been working on for 5 years. And we started in Africa this last year with the understanding that if we take the knee off the neck, which is chemical farming on the southern border of the Sahara Desert, that desert will start to regreen. And it will do that not on its own. It will do that because of the elephants. Over the last 10 years, 200,000 elephants have overpopulated Botswana in southern Africa. 200,000 elephants have outbreeded their food system, which elephants never do. Elephants have no predator. They always grow to the right appropriate population for their food supply and their water supply. 200,000 excess elephants inexplicably have occurred over the last 10 years. And for that, they have destroyed the forests of Botswana, annihilated all of it, because elephants are the water keepers of this planet. And when the elephants are allowed to march, they will regreen Africa. And so Project Biome is working on the private and public and governmental agreements and arrangements over the next few years to allow those elephants to walk. And when they start walking, we will see a green Africa occur, because nature knows that she wants to take a breath, and nature is preparing for that breath. We are in the way at the moment, and we can just simply not be in the way, and we can walk those corridors with those elephants to make sure there's no poaching, to make sure they are safe, and we will create an army of humans that will celebrate the walk of the elephants, and North Africa will green, and the planet will not be 135 degrees because we took a breath.
Beautiful ending.
Now I'm taking a breath. Incredible. Can we just give it up for Richard and Zach and Carla and Debra and everybody that has contributed to this conversation. Thank you so much. So as we close out, this is
yeah. No, I just want to. You're not getting away with that. Oh. I just want to give Blue, I want us to all give her a round of applause and or a shriek or a woo or a, Awesome, Blue. Thank you so much, on behalf of all of us for making this happen and just for being such an incredible being. I think you're one of those elephants. And we're going to follow you.
Thank you. Alrighty, so I'm just going to close it out with a final prayer. Okay, so just closing our eyes and coming to a comfortable position is an opportunity to integrate what it is that we have received today. Let's allow a deep breath in through our nose, hold it on the inhale. And all pieces that wish to be integrated, not needing to be remembered by the mind, but integrated by the body on a somatic level of all 75 trillion cells to integrate this information. And with the exhale, that integration is going to begin in 3, 2, 1, sighing it out. Just allowing ourselves to close out on the note of gratitude. The gratitude for this incredible quantum computer that we call a body. That our souls have just chose so courageously to incarnate into. On a planet that is so diverse with so much life. That there is miracles laced in the mundane if we're so present to receive it. That recognizing when we pass from these physical bodies, the one thing we'll be remembered for is how we made people feel. So may we continue to transform and transmute this desire to consume. And allowing ourselves to receive the gift that is already hidden in plain sight right now. Here in the memory of our gut, our hearts, our bodies, and our connections. These gifts that we are given throughout this human experience. So may every single day we count our blessings and our gratitude for every single gift we have in our lives, recognizing gratitude is just calling in more things to be grateful for. And recognizing that giving and receiving is the same energy. And when we truly understand that, we would not go another day without giving. And may we remember that the earth is our body. The water is our blood. The air is our breath, and the fire is our spirit. And so we remember together as one global family for the greatest good of all beings, of all sentient life. And so it is.